Oops, I Just Catharted, an eclectic collection of essays by Valerie Lynn Stevens. Complex PTSD and the minefields we must heed. I often feel disconnected from my feelings and my experiences. Being a deeply creative and intelligent person, I am grieved by this and unsettled by this. Yet I also know where it comes from, and it comes from a good place, a self-preservatory place. Sometimes we must suppress a present response to a disturbing event that happens to us in order to staunch the potential floods of other traumatic past memories from engulfing us and perhaps leading us to no good. This is true especially for survivors of systematic childhood abuse who become afflicted with PTSD and complex PTSD in our adulthood. And indeed, even as adults, we are victimized by others in this way too. And the quality of our lives is profoundly affected by this condition. Incidentally, this is the main reason why emotional abuse is such an egregious sin to inflict upon another, as the effects are life-lastingly insidious and pernicious. In a word, almost everything that we deign to do must always be regarded as a potential minefield type situation. Now, mind you, as long as we remain merely vigilant rather than paralytically hypervigilant, we can procure for ourselves some relative measures of peace and fulfillment. Nevertheless, getting back to the subject of emotional constriction and suppression, whenever we experience a present violation of our person, and this includes all beings designated as Homo sapiens and not just those with PTSD diagnoses, whether that trauma be a physical and or emotional one, we fear opening up to the full experience of this because we all too keenly recall the dark paths which these same emotions and memories led us onto in our past, even only in a mindscape sense. The mind is an amazing and complex organ, but it is also a tricky and potentially dangerous one. In fact, I believe PTSD to be a general symptom of the human condition, in many ways. We humans are very vulnerable and complicated creatures. I believe that everyone suffers from PTSD in relation to something in varying degrees of intensity. This life can be brutal and godless at times. So can our fellow man. So can we ourselves, no matter how much we may attempt to purify by rationalization our own sins against others, even if they were in self-defense. For the most part, I tend to agree with Jean-Paul Sartre's assertion that hell is others. Yet I also concede that others can also help us to experience more heavenly things as well at times. Hence the never-ending dilemma: should I open myself or not to the full range of my human experience and condition? But the thing is, as author and speaker Brené Brown once keenly observed, we can't be selective about which part of our mind we open and which part stays closed without risking either vulnerability and trauma, or, on the other side of things, anhedonia, and a total inability to feel anything worth feeling. I learned this early on. Relative happiness and its pursuit must come to terms with this verity, or risk never fulfilling itself. Then again, quite honestly, some of us have just come to terms with another verity, that of our own nature. I personally have had to accept the fact that I will always be damaged in certain ways, and hence unable to completely immerse myself into the fullness of what we refer to as a normal life. My own mental stability depends upon an acceptance of this. We are what we are. No amount of self-help projects or even inward immersion into our own psyche in order to come to know and heal ourselves can get at all of the wounds which we carry deep inside of ourselves. Some things, we must accept, are broken and cannot be fixed. They can only be worked around to the best of our ability. We cannot undo the damage that was done to us beyond a certain point. But, don't get me wrong, my intention is not fatalism, but realism. What I am saying is that we are who we are for better and for worse, and that we can only try to make the best out of what we have been left with. Because I have witnessed some dark things come out of my wounds, and some miraculous and astoundingly redemptive and beautiful things come out of them. But it is true that we are what we are, as the saying goes, in relation to the individual past histories which we carry inside of our psyches. Once I was watching a film, and one of the main characters, who was a survivor of abuse, said, "I will never be normal because of what they did to me." I totally connected with that line of dialogue. I feel this every day, at least once, when I am faced with yet another way in which my condition limits me from being a fully functional human being. Yet for me, as long as I consistently strive to own my own darkness and brokenness without inflicting it upon others, I can have peace with myself. So we all have to find a point of compromise with ourselves, because we can't be it all. And at least now I have come far along enough in my own journey of healing that I no longer internalize others' sins and transgressions like my abusers had programmed me to do when I was young. Now I know from deep within my whole being that I did not deserve their mistreatment or the damage which they left me with, that I in no way brought upon my own self. But I believe that we all have a story of survival and trauma to tell, including our abusers, past or present. Yet we all must make the choice as to whether or not we allow our private pain and darkness to turn us into a victim and another transgressor, or into a survivor and another purveyor of the truth and the light. It is always totally up to us. Yet unfortunately our society and culture have a long way to go as far as recognizing psychological acts of violence towards other human beings as equally egregious and as equally in need of validation on the part of the afflicted. It's funny how whenever you mention PTSD, most people automatically associate it with military servicemen and women and the effects of combat and political, physical wars. And no doubt this form of it is just as valid and just as afflictive. Yet, survivors of more emotional or psychological kinds of trauma aren't really immediately given clout, when by all rights they absolutely should be. I myself have experienced the way in which some people can view you with either incredulity and or suspicion when you share with them that you have PTSD. I understand the aversion, however, to such things, as many people are just afraid to explore their own minds and perhaps similar experiences with trauma that is emotional and psychologically based. But I also find this to be a poor excuse for the disparagement of mine or any other person's human condition and experience merely because they are too afraid to connect with that of their own. Moreover, I think this explains a lot of ills in human society, actually. Individuals who, instead of choosing self-awareness and integration, choose self-deception and depravity. M. Scott Peck's book, The People of the Lie, was indispensable to me on my own journey, and I still refer to it from time to time as a guide in how to identify those persons who choose projection of their own shadow onto others instead of accountability and proper governance for and of themselves. But it's not just about identification, but the validation as well, that I had every right to protect myself from my abusers, as they, very clearly, were in the wrong. In my own family system, I never had anyone to stand up for me in relation to what was true and right. I played the role of the identified patient and, in some more emotional ways, the scapegoat. If I attempted to assert myself, they would quickly put me back into my place by either gaslighting me or inventing some reason why I deserved their mistreatment. Another way they tried to manipulate me back into my roles was by taking a personality trait of mine or a character trait and attempting to make me feel ashamed of it, or like I was inferior or inadequate in some way. Yes, I believe that one would also fall under the category of gaslighting. In finale, as they used to say back in the heyday of the 1970s and 80s self-help boom, you can either choose to continue the cycle or to end the cycle. The legacies which our family systems have left us with may be totally unfair and unjust, but we must make the choice for the latter and not the former if we are to end this cycle of psychological violence so rampant in Western culture and society. Not that I believe that the problems can be solved, but I do believe that they can be improved upon to a certain degree, person by person. We are all held accountable for our choices, eventually, and we should deem it in no way acceptable to inflict any kind of intentional distress upon our fellow human beings. Mind you, I stressed the word intentional. If we would all utilize our emotional trauma in the name of preventing ourselves from becoming just like our abusers, instead of looking for an easy way out of facing ourselves, what a slightly but nevertheless safer society we would all dwell in. As many wise thinkers have noted, what we do to another, we in turn do to ourselves, as we were all essentially created with the same psychology, at least in a general humanistic sense. Also, I would add to that, what we do to ourselves ends up also affecting others for better and for worse. We must take this life seriously and how we engage in it, because in the end, that's all we're left with besides our scars. Because there is no such thing as fate, only choice and consequence. And PTSD. But at least some things are consistent.